one of the many, many very significant things that you tell us about, Susan, is that the cultural expectations that we currently have are largely negative when it comes to menopause, and they're associated with all the negative things, the bigger picture of the negative associations of getting older. But what I found is the most interesting, like when you think of menopause, you think hot flashes and night sweats and all middle-age spread and all this stuff that's bad, 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 bad. Like, where do we ever hear anything that's good other than you don't have the inconvenience of having your period or pain of cramps, maybe? And then for those women who don't want any more children, they don't have to worry about conceiving. I guess those would be good. But you mentioned that was really educational for me, was that in societies where they don't have negative connotations with getting older, they're associated with less physical menopausal symptoms, bad menopausal symptoms. That's incredibly important for people to just pause for a second. That in cultures where they don't think of getting older as something bad and menopause is something bad, for lack of a better term, they actually have less menopausal symptoms across the board. Do you want to comment on that?
Yes, because really our thoughts and our bodies are one. There's been a lot of research done, and it's kind of a relatively new science of epigenetics that really tells us that how we feel about something, our perception of our environment, literally changes our cellular and biological processes to adapt to that perception, because at root we are really adaptable organisms. Our bodies haven't changed that much since we hit the planet, but we've been born into very, very different situations throughout even the last 100 years. I look at my mother, and I had grandmothers that also lived well into their 90s and early hundreds. And
wow.
I would listen with clear minds, so they were able to tell the stories to me. And it just amazes me how quickly things do change. And so we're made to adapt to whatever comes along. And for instance, even in the world today, a baby being born in a sleepy town in the Midwest whose mother's pregnancy was kind of, serene pregnancy, is going to be wired very differently than a baby born in one of the war-torn countries right now where stress is extremely high, because nature wants us to be able to survive and to live. So, for instance, our mother's level of stress hormones, from whatever reason, you don't have to be in the middle of a war zone for it to feel like that in your body, and for your body to be responding to stress all the time. That those stress hormones in the mother's body are affecting the baby's brain as it's being wired, because nature wants you to be prepared for whatever world it is you're being born into. So if it sees the world you're being born into as a very stressful one, then you're going to be wired to have a more delicate response to that. You're going to kick into survival mode much more quickly than someone who does not marinate in those stress hormones as their brain is being formed. So you can end up with two women, one wired for stress, for lack of a better word, the other one not so much. And as they move through their life, they could be in exactly the same situation, but one of them would perceive it as stressful and the other wouldn't, because they are more finely attuned to that situation. And because stress is one of the, if not the major factor in what kind of menopause we're going to experience, this can make a big difference. So these are even things that happen in the womb that can affect us, 54 years down the road when we're going through menopause, and we'll find ourselves in a very different situation, because at the time the ovaries are winding down their estradiol production. It never really goes away, but it winds down. The adrenal glands, the fat cells, are supposed to take up hormone production for the second half of life. It's more complicated than that, but simply put, that's what happens. And so the woman who arrives at menopause, having been in stress response a lot more during her life, will have adrenals that are very tired and cannot catch the ball when it's thrown to them. And things spiral downward, unravel, and that's when you have more symptoms. So literally everything builds, upon what went before. And I think the more conscious we can be about that path and that trail that's led to where we are now, the better we'll be.
See, I love that. There's just so much in there that you just said. I was like taking notes quickly because there was like so many points that I definitely want to like put a big, highlight over. But I think a major takeaway for the audience is to just take a pause and really hear what you're saying, is that regardless of your age, women, it doesn't matter if you're a 25-year-old woman listening or watching, or if you're 60, doesn't matter. Premenopause, perimenopause, no menopause, amenopause, whatever. How you live now is going to determine how you live later. And we don't know what we're going to title this show yet, but it'll probably have the word menopause in there somewhere. And I'm actually thinking of not doing that, although I want to do that because I want to attract the women that need to hear this about menopause, that are struggling right now because they don't have this information. But I don't want to deter the younger women from hearing this message, because to your point, which is so important, how you're living now, you're setting up your whole physiology for how you're going to handle the next phase of your life, is what I'm hearing you say.
Absolutely.
So if you're living in a real revved up stress state, like so many of us are, particularly with the pandemic and everything going on, and all the fear mongering and all the over busy and distraction and never having an off switch and all this stuff, that we're not following the natural rhythms and cycles of life, the ebb and the flow, like the ocean. Tide comes in, tide goes out, doesn't just stay in. So we're setting up our physiology for complete burnout. And to your point, that the hormones that stop being produced, and particularly estrogen, by the ovaries once you hit menopause, then it kicks down to your adrenal glands, which is another hormonal gland, to then pick up the slack, and your fat, if I have this correct, and please correct me. The fat and the adrenals then produce the estrogen you need to kind of keep feeling good. And if you're completely burnt out and stressed out and your adrenals have been whipped to death like a tired horse, they're not going to pull up the load, and you're going to experience all the unwanted menopausal symptoms. So how you're living now is important.